Thelma, buenas tardes. ¿Me puede escuchar?
Sí.
Hola, buenas tardes. Sí, por acá estamos.
¿Qué tal? Quería rápido comentarle que voy a estar haciendo un poco de la interpretación como nos había solicitado y quería proponerle que más que hacer una interpretación palabra a palabra, digo, no soy un intérprete profesional, me permitiera, digo, usted comunica una idea o un bloque de ideas y después yo hago una traducción un poco en síntesis. Quería proponerle esa dinámica.
Ok, me parece bien.
Y si quizás se extiende un poco demasiado de lo que yo pudiera transmitir, me voy a permitir interrumpirla, pero sería para hacer esa traducción.
Ok, perfecto.
Gracias.
Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's conversation about the challenges facing Bernardo Arevalo, the recently elected president of Guatemala. My name is John Torpy, and I'm director of the Ralph Bunche Institute for International Studies at the Graduate School of the City University of New York. As many of you will know, Bernardo Arevalo was elected on an anti-corruption platform and with plans to promote education and social welfare, as well as to better address the needs of Guatemala's substantial indigenous population, which has in the past been subjected to mistreatment by the government. The dictator Efraín Ríos Montt was convicted and sentenced to prison for genocide and crimes against humanity for his role in the deaths of hundreds of thousands during the early 1980s. Arévalo is the standard bearer of the Semilla or Seed Party and was perhaps not the most likely candidate to win the presidential election in Guatemala. Like myself, he was and is a card-carrying sociologist, not really a professional politician. But he had served as deputy foreign minister during 1994 to 1995 and as ambassador to Spain during 1995 to 1996. More recently, he was a representative in the Congress of Guatemala in the years 2020 through 2024. He also enjoyed the name recognition that came from the fact that his father had been president of Guatemala during 1945 to 1951. Bernardo Arevalo was born in Uruguay because his father had fled Guatemala in the aftermath of the American-supported coup d'etat of 1954 that overthrew Jacobo Arbenz. This time around, however, the support of the United States for a free and fair election was more prominent. Excuse me. Among other examples, the US government announced just a week ago that former Guatemalan President Alejandro Eduardo Giammattei will be denied entry into the United States in consideration of his involvement in what the State Department called significant corruption in office. Needless to say, the government of Bernardo Arevalo faces powerful forces that do not share his views about corruption, about the treatment of the indigenous peoples of Guatemala, or about other matters. He and his Semilla party face difficult challenges with regard to carrying out their agenda. We've assembled a distinguished group of analysts, commentators, and participants in Guatemalan affairs to address these challenges and the road ahead for President Arévalo. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone out there that we are recording this event for later posting on YouTube. I also want to especially thank David Jacobson of the University of South Florida in Tampa for his support in making this event happen. I also want to thank my colleagues, Osvaldo Mena Aguilar and Juan Acevedo, for their help in making it happen as well. So let me introduce our speakers now. First, we'll have Claudia Méndez Arriaza, who's a journalist with 25 years of experience covering politics and justice in Guatemala. Today, she hosts and coordinates the production of contents in Con Criterio, a daily analysis and debate radio morning show. Her coverage of the electoral process in 2023 has been published in America's Quarterly magazine. She's founded 3 informative and leading media outlets and also worked for 15 years as an investigative reporter and editor for El Periódico. She's part of the Nieman class of 2020 at Harvard University, and Nieman Fellowship, the very prestigious fellowship for journalists that takes place at Harvard. She's the Spanish translator of the book, The Art of Political Murder by Francisco Goldman, which came out with Grove Press and Anagrama in 2009, as well as of the book, Guatemala, Eternal Spring, Eternal Tyranny from 2010. Next, we have Daniel Haering, who's co-founder, senior researcher, former president, and leader of the Anticorruption Project, at Asociación Diálogos Guatemala. He has extensive experience in public policy research and university-level teaching. He served as the National Commissioner of the Presidential Commission for the Reform of Drug Policy in Guatemala from 2012 to 2014. He's former director of the Ibn Khaldun International Institute for Research in Political Studies and International Relations, former academic director of at the School of Government, and over 11 years spent as a political analyst and commentator on public policies in television, radio, digital, and print media. He currently hosts the Tangente podcast. Next, we have Andrea Ixchíu Hernández, who is a Maya Quiche woman, journalist, filmmaker, and land protector. She's coordinator at Hackeo Cultural, an initiative and community communication methodology for the construction of collective narratives for the defense of indigenous territory. She's a consultant at Culture Hack Labs, an international not-for-profit consultancy that supports organizations, social movements, and activists to create cultural change. She served as an indigenous community government authority in Totonicapán, Guatemala, taking on responsibilities to better her community. Andrea is a 2014 Nobel Women's Fellow, 2016 Sakharov Fellow, 2020 Bertha Fellow, 2021 Ford Global Fellow, and 2022 Christensen Fellow. She develops communication strategies, narratives, and technologies for the defense of life and territory with indigenous communities throughout Latin America and international spaces. Finally, we have Thelma Aldana, who is former Attorney General of Guatemala. She received her law degree in 1982 from the University of San Carlos in Quetzaltenango. She also has a master's degree in civil and procedural law. She started her professional career in 1981 in family court in Quetzaltenango. In 1999, she was appointed a judge in a court of appeals. In 2009, she became a magistrate in the Supreme Court of Guatemala and served as the president of the Supreme Court during 2011 to 2012. In 2014, she succeeded Claudia Méndez as Guatemala's Attorney General. So there they all are. Each of our speakers will speak for approximately 15 minutes, and then we will turn into a Q&A for approximately a half hour. If you have questions, please submit them to the Q&A, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. Let me now turn to our first speaker, Claudia Méndez Arriaza.
Thank you, John, for this invitation, and thank you for the CONI Graduate Center for putting this together, and especially for putting an eye on Guatemala, which is always important for our country. Thanks. I'm honored to share this panel with you all, with Andrea, with Daniel, and of course with Licenciada Thelma Aldana. Thanks a lot. So I'll start quick by doing this exercise. It's been almost 2 weeks since Bernardo Arevalo assumed as president in Guatemala. And I think that if we take a picture right now and try to build a map of actors, we can actually see what's going on within, 7 days of taking power. We can see that contrary to what everyone, even the SID movement or Semilla movement expected, it's not the Congress, the power that it's going to be obstructionist to his agenda, at least not in the short term. They succeeded, and when I say they, I mean the political party and Arévalo itself. They succeeded in building this coalition of different parties in Congress that have shown so far strong support and majority support to Bernardo Arevalo and Movimiento Semilla. So that's one actor on his side. We're building the side of the allies for Bernardo Arevalo in these 10 days. The second main actor, or maybe we have seen them, along the 6 months of all the drama on his way to take power. It's, of course, the international community, who has been really a strong backer in his way to the presidency. And of course, the social base, who has been supporting him. There was a poll, there are 2 different polls that show us that he has a very high support from the people. One of them was by the end of December, and he was around 70s, not taking power still. And then there's another new one of young people from 18 to 35 years. And I think his appropriate is around 73 or something. So then we have these crucial actors. Congress is not obstructionist, international community, and the social base or social support that he has had since he made it to the runoff. Then we have to see where is the obstruction or opposition to his agenda. And I think it's the Constitutional Court who proved that it's going to be, holding what was going on his way to the presidency. And then the public ministry, of course. Today, the public ministry and the head of the public ministry, General Attorney Consuelo Porras, it's news here because she finally answered a petition, an invitation of Bernardo Arevalo, with queries, specific queries around obligations of the public ministry, and one case in particular, and she responded that she was not obliged to respond to the president. That's the news today, but that shows you, it might be seen as particular or too specific, but that shows you what's the game or what's the balance of power, or what's the dynamic of power in between those two institutions. I'll start by that. Talking about allies, talking about opposition, and talking about obstruction. We have to bear in mind that the Constitutional Court confirmed that dubious resolution of a judge that canceled Semilla as a political party, and with that they lost grip of power, official or formal power in Congress. Then I will go to the midterm and then long-term scenarios. And I think one of the biggest questions, or one of the biggest challenges for the Arévalo agenda, is going to be the anti-corruption campaign. This is the president who held a narrative anti-corruption during 2023, and that was the winner, the narrative who won the elections. The main question here is, how is he going to succeed with that public ministry, who is playing like the opposition to his agenda? And maybe the question right now is for him, but it's also a question for the public ministry. How is General Attorney going to hold and explain and move forward with questions here regarding the former administration? I mean, she was the general attorney during that administration, and any denounce, any case that it's going to be, denounced by this administration, it's going to become a big question for her as well. And there's another scenario in the shortest term, but it's going to be a definite process for his presidency, and it's the election of courts. This year, the Congress must call for a renewal of the courts in Guatemala. That's the election of around 253 judges and magistrates, including the 13 magistrates of the Supreme Court. And I think that is going to be a process that will show if Arévalo can take as an ally in that map, that initial map that I drew, the Supreme Court and the courts. And if those courts, the election of those courts, can move forward with the anti-corruption agenda. I will leave it like that. I know we have 15 minutes, but I'm eager to hear what my colleagues in the panel have to say. And that's it, pretty much.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And let's turn it over to Daniel Haering.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation and for this wonderful panel. And hello to Claudia, Andrea, and of course, Thelma. It's good to see you all three, and to be with these fantastic women here with me. If we have to address the question of what are the challenges that Bernardo has now, that he's in power. I mean, the first really big challenge was to avoid a coup d'etat, and this is really important to understand how the transition of power was working. Is you have to understand that the only scenario where we avoided a more profundization of autocracy, of the kleptocratic Guatemalan autocracy, was that it was really, real big surprise. I mean, what happened in the 25th of June was absolutely astonishing. None of us had it in our cards, and this is something that played in favor of Guatemalan democracy. But it comes with a cost. The cost is that you have a very, very small political party. Semilla is not it doesn't have like a lot of people that can work in high levels of government. and that is a really big challenge for the new government, because if you see the ministers that Bernardo appointed, you already see some people that come from the system, from the kleptocratic system. And that is really, I mean, if he wants to have results, when you need people that are going to give you those results, and some of those results involve going against interests that are actually represented in the ministers that he elected. So you have, for example, I think the most clear example is the minister of infrastructure, that is Jazmín de la Vega. She comes with a team that is very much associated with how things have been done in the past. And I think that's going to be a really big challenge to to show some results in that sense. The second big challenge is that it's a very small political party, and it's not a really big party in Congress. So you only have 23 deputies from 160. And now, as Claudia was saying, there's some kind of coalition holding, because they saw the momentum and they created some expectations. But that now that Samuel wasn't able, because of what the Constitutional Court did, wasn't able to hold the presidency, and he had to give that opportunity to Nery Ramos, who is not from the Semilla movement, and is someone that is president of Congress, but he's been a congressman only a week and a half. So he doesn't have the experience. He does being bombarded by the rest of his colleagues, and I don't like the Semilla strategy with the Bernardo government. And I think that is a really, really big challenge. I don't see that coalition holding strong that for that long, you know. We need to I mean, we need to see that to be very much vigilant of what's happening there. But don't count in a Congress that is going to be, I mean, in favor of a big reformist movement in Guatemala. Out of the 92 votes that they got in the 15th of January, I would say you have part of the kleptocratic system. These are not like reformists. These are people that are gonna want their contracts. They want their people in government. They're gonna want expectations that the Congress men and women have that are part of that coalition, and it's going to be really difficult for Nery Ramos to manage all those different negotiations.
Daniel,
The other thing,
let me interrupt for just a second. You're freezing intermittently, so I don't know if you can improve the stability of your internet connection, but that's probably what's going on.
for my part, is it says here it's okay.
It says it's okay.
In
Well,
my-
all right.
yeah.
I think it's freezing for everybody, but I don't know. Maybe just for me.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you listened to all what I said, but it's basically the first challenge is an internal challenge. Is Bernardo's own team. He has created. He has put up a team that has people that are not from the Semilla movement, are not reformist, and they have to like obey what he says. But it's going to be a challenge. The kind of other type of connections these people have, especially at the infrastructure level. I see there's going to be challenges for the Jazmín de la Vega to hold office, for the next few months, because what you see in her team, the team that she picked, is not like what you would expect from the Semilla movement, and that's something that's going to have certain costs. Then you have the problem, the challenge in Congress. I think in Congress you don't have a strong coalition. You have a very weak coalition, probably 60 congressmen and women from that voted for Semilla in the 15th of January are not reformists, and this is a really, really big challenge for them. I think another big challenge is, as Claudia was saying, is Consuelo Porras, is the attempt of a coup d'etat is not dead. It's really weak, but it's not dead nowadays. So she is gonna be a big challenge. I think the Bernardo should have in his number one list of things that he has to do is to be able to, in some certain way, get her out of office. If he in the next 3 to 6 months gets Consuelo out of office, I think he's gonna have a really, really big victory, and that is gonna has implications in every other aspect of management of his government. I think that is a really important item. If she holds office for the next 2 years, maybe not the first year, but the second year is going to be really, really a challenge for him to have basically a very strong enemy in Consuelo Porras in all the things she can do. Very weak nowadays, but she can get other actors to come around her, especially if they feel they have they can operate certain changes regarding like the Bernardo government, and I think this is really important for you guys. The other challenge is how he is going to deal, if that happens, we don't know, but how could he deal with a potential Trump government in the United States? And this is something that people here are part of the kleptocratic system, have their hopes. All the bets for them are in if the United States changes government and Trump introduces a 2.0 version of what he was doing towards the region in 2017, 2018, now we have a really big chance to change things and to weaken Bernardo's government. So I think he should be planning the eventuality of having a Trump government in the United States. If he doesn't, he could be in 2025 with a judicial system against him, the United States government, I wouldn't say against him, but pressuring him to do things he doesn't want to do and weaken his position. And then maybe you could see changes in Congress that are going to have a really big, strong implications for him in Guatemala. The other challenge is, as Claudia was saying, is all the different elections that you're going to have from now on in going into 2026 that are going to change the judicial system. You have the Supreme Court changes in this year in September. You're going to have a new election of the Constitutional Court in 2026. As in the tribunal, the election Supreme Tribunal of Elections, the Tribunal Supremo Electoral, 2026 is the year as well that we change general attorney. That's really, really important. And Contraloría, the office that is appointed by Congress that audits the execution of the budget is changing as well at the end of that year. So if he gets alive to 2026 and he's able to operate a political strategy around changing all those institutions, especially the General Attorney's Office and especially the Constitutional Court, I think we're going to have a really, really different 2027 year. That's the election year of 2027. He has a very, very precise challenge, and I think it goes against his nature, that he has to understand that he has to play politics, and he has to play rough politics in this scenario. If he doesn't use all his power, and he has the security system, and he has international relations, and he has control of the budget, and how you execute the budget, and he has a quite decent amount of Congress people in Congress that can well do their part against Consuelo Porras, especially, and regarding all the process that starts now in April and is finishing in September of this year regarding Supreme Court. If he plays rough and he plays intelligent and he plays tactical, I think he has a really good chance of changing things in the judicial system. And if he does that, he has a really, really good chance of having a very successful 2027 year. And maybe, who knows, having the same party, or maybe a party that follows a reformist agenda getting into the presidency and having a more robust presence in Congress in the following 4 years. I think those are the challenges he has now. One of the advantages he has is that it is a very fragmented political system. You have lots of different groups. They're not united. They don't have a great political leader. You don't have a Bukele from that side of the aisle. And you have more and more political leaders that are appearing in the reformist side. I mean, you have a very interesting figure in Andrea Ixchíu, for example. She's a congresswoman from Semilla. Samuel Pérez, of course, is the big leader of the Semilla movement in Congress. But you have as well this Nery Ramos. Maybe he has a bright future in politics if he does the right thing. And in the other side of the aisle, you have just thieves, and people are not adapting at what really changed in Guatemala and that is like the different forms of communication and different manners of doing politics in a more modern way, I would say, not such a clientelistic way. So I think that is a great advantage that the Semilla movement has. And of course, they can have either ruthless in some ways, and either strategic in some other. They can have great achievements in these 4 years. If they're not, if they let all these different kleptocratic networks reconfigure, you are going to have a really rough time, and it's going to be very difficult to hold to get results. And that's the last challenge that he has, to get results, to manage expectations, because people are really expecting a different government. And if they fail, maybe you can have 2027 with a very different approach. Maybe having I don't think we're gonna go back to the classical political elites that we have, but we could get some kind of Bukelism or some kind of populist comeback that transforms Guatemala in a way that we don't want it to be transformed. I think those are the challenges we have, and Bernardo especially has for the next 4 years.
Thanks very much. But before I let you go, could I just ask you to clarify a little bit what you mean by Bukelism for those who may not know what you mean?
Well, Bukele is the dictator, I would say. He's the consolidating dictator of El Salvador, and he's concentrated power in El Salvador because he got to office in a very democratic way. I mean, people love him. He has a very strong approval. Once he got to power in 2019, he started all this process of concentrating power around him and his family. And I think that's something that is not known here in Guatemala. We have very fragmented, very corrupt, but a very fragmented system. Maybe the solution of the Guatemalan political problem is going to come by in a populist, autocratic manner. That's my point. We were going to have some kind of version of Bukelism in the figure of Carlos Pineda in these elections. And Carlos Pineda was this guy that he came from nothing to maybe something like 25 to 30% of a vote in polls, and he was not part of the system as we know it, but he was not like a reformist. He was a populist. He obviously has links to organized crime, and he was thrown out of the race because they didn't feel he was going to be respectful of, I would say, the pact of the corrupt. I mean, he was not going to be respectful of the different negotiations that the fragmented kleptocratic system has. Of course, they throw him out, and that's the space that Semilla occupies. So now they're regretting throwing him out. That's for sure. But the that he had in campaigning in Guatemala in 2023 is non-parallel, I would say, in Guatemala's political history. We haven't had someone going from 3 to 3 percent of intention of votes to maybe 30%. And that's something that has to raise alarms. People didn't vote for Semilla because they're a really centrist, democratic, and progressive movement. They voted because they are different. And we're willing in Guatemala to vote differently. And that's what the polls show. And as the election was approaching, they just went eliminating all these different candidates. They could mean a change in the system, and they proposed very different types of change. And the last one was Carlos Pineda. And I think we could go back to some kind of Carlos Pinedismo or Bukelismo in 2027 if Bernardo is not successful.
I see. Thanks very much. Thanks for that clarification. And perhaps somebody will want to get back to that in the Q&A. But let me turn it over now to Andrea Ixchíu Hernández.
Thank you, John. I am very delighted to be here and joined Doña Thelma, Claudia, Daniel, and thank you to the Connie and the organization that set up this space for us to share. So I wanted to talk about how impactful it is, and especially for people like me that are in exile in Guatemala. In 2024 began with news around how Virginia La Parra, who was a prisoner of conscience during 2 years, was released. She was prosecuted for being an anti-corruption prosecutor. She was put into jail and she faced torture. And also we had other type of news. The former president, Otto Pérez Molina, who was convicted in 2015 for corruption, was released after paying a bail for 10 million of quetzales. But also at the same time, 7 people died due to the lack of electricity and a general hospital in the main capital. And a lot of the militaries that are linked to the crimes against humanity and crimes of genocide were stopped. So for me, after 2 years in exile, the news about Guatemala are a permanent reminder of the fascism that expelled me from home. I have not been able to return my town and my community because my expulsion, like of the many of other brave and much more valuable people than me, is due to nothing more than being exercised in our muscle of action and organization and critical thinking, which is still comfortable to a few cowards that had a lot of money and power in Guatemala. Consuelo Porras and her prosecutors as operators of a regime of impunity have more than 100 people in exile. That includes justice operators, journalists, human rights defenders, and advocates who are being arbitrarily prosecuted. They accuse me, and along with other groups of fellow citizens, of obstructing justice, sedition, attacking the important monuments and symbols of national unity. But actually what they are doing is using our judiciary system to create a vendetta against any type of citizen that organize, that work, and participate during the process of trying to rebuild our judiciary system and fight the impunity and the corruption. Our current electoral democracy is very similar to the oxygen mask that keeps a sick body alive. Consuelo Porras is just the visible face of many criminal structures that actively seek to dismantle decades of progress in strengthening the justice system in Guatemala. With the suspension of criminal prosecution of soldiers, politicians, businessmen linked to war crimes, drug trafficking, and corruption, they are creating a culture of impunity. In the last years, thousands of people have left the country forced by violence, for the inequality, and some are even willing to cross the borders in Mexico and the United States without any paper, just to be able to put food on their family table. And although these macroeconomics in Guatemala show us that the country is a perfectly possible place to live in dignity, the accumulation of land, the money, and power puts the vast majority in precarious conditions. And for this to change, there are many things that need to be transformed, but the long history of colonialism has left wounds, marks, and scars. Guatemala is a country with more than 7 million people where ancient peoples live, representing, according to our last census, the 44% of the population that belongs to 22 Mayan groups, but also to the Garifuna, Xinca, and Creole Afro-descendant people. People who, despite being barely recognized with our own indigenous government systems, were the ones during 105 days of peaceful resistance outside the office of the General Attorney that stopped the coup d'etat. It has been because of the massive organizational capacity of network of indigenous communal structures that were top this coup d'etat that also we forced to make some retreat to that violent way of doing anti-democratic actions by the fiscal Consuelo Porras. And the fact is that the platoon outside the General Attorney's office is due to the role of them as a structure that has been used to criminalize the demands of the indigenous peoples, in which in many indigenous communities has been criminalizing and judicializing our indigenous authorities and are promoting violent evictions against communities that are dispossessed with legal tricks of their ancestral lands for the benefit of big landowners, polluting extractive companies, and foreign investment. So what does it take for a new elected government, as the Bernardo Arevalo's one, in the midst of larger protests to stop the looting, to stop the extractivism that sustains the violence that affect communities? During the 505 days of resistance, the indigenous peoples used various fights and strategies, from rotation, collective cooking, everyday deliberations were made, political ways of organizing were changing, they were putting pressure everywhere. The communities, the indigenous communities, applied acupuncture to a weakened and sick Guatemalan electoral democracy because we were not willing to tolerate authoritarianism. The legacy of the dictatorships and genocidal practices perpetrated against the communities left thousands of people in exile, displacement, mass murder, silence. But above all, the effects of the genocide perpetrated in our communities has created also impunity that has been faced in various courts and that communities confront daily in the hearings that are being doing. So the mobilization to defend democracy that came from the cantones, that was responded by the communities and the urban cities, occur at least in 3 phases. And the first that was very important to talk about is how the communities in the highlands, especially the Quiche communities that are the ones where I come from, the 48 cantones of Totonicapán, the indigenous government of Chichicastenango, and also the Cachiqueles in the lake of Atitlan and around it in the Sololá, were the ones who supported their authorities. But then the moment started to make calls to the markets, to the more popular spaces. And a lot of the people agree to going to strike during several days in front of the attorney's office to present support to the demands of the indigenous authorities. So with this universe of markets, of hardworking people, popular economy, join the strikes. So you can see a lot of neighborhoods or vendors and people that were sympathizing and were seeing themselves reflected with the indigenous demands. A lot of popular neighborhoods joined. And it's worth highlighting that the colonies that are called the Betania and the colonies in the Zone 5 and 18 in the main capital of Guatemala rapidly raise and support the points of resistance in the city. So then late that, the city middle class massively joined the uprising, especially after October the 20th, from trans collectives through medics, to students, doctors, artists, group of children, the groups of people that are looking for their missing ones. Together, they paralyzed the country. So there were a lot of judicial actions that were directed in all possible ways to stop the coup. And that is the protection that had been presented in the Constitutional Court Memorial in Congress. So the communities, the organizations do a whole of activities. And they develop and that gave us idea of how different targeted were all the directions in this strategy. They combine indirect action with intense legal activity. So it is important to remark that this popular uprising marked an end to the impunity disguised as arbitrary legality. This popular uprising led by the indigenous authorities had gave us hope. It opens new routes for the reconstruction of our political, economical, and social fabric. Despite all the challenges that Claudia and Daniel had been mentioning around the institutional, trickery that is being used to do not allow Bernardo Arevalo to take office, the local and international pressure for the liberation of Guatemala from the criminal structures that want to keep governing is very urgent. And that's why it is important to remark that the expulsion of Consuelo Porras is very, very necessary to dismantle this machinery of abuse that has served to guarantee impunity to a lot of the officials that have been prosecuted and convicted for corruption and crimes against humanity. There is a big need of coalition of very various political democratic forces that want profound changes in Guatemala, because we want to continue to build the diverse alliances and the strength and political place of indigenous governance systems is very necessary to rebuild our democracy, and that needs to be recognized and respected. So I wanted to share about because I think it's very necessary to highlight the role of the indigenous governance systems during this organization of the resistance that allowed Bernardo Arevalo to take office. And I see that in that collective ways of organizing through the indigenous communities, that there will be a crucial actor for the reconstruction of our social fabric and democratic fabric in Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Appreciate that. We turn now to Thelma Aldana, who is going to speak in her native Spanish, if I understand correctly. And our colleague Osvaldo Mena will interpret, at least in a kind of summary way, not simultaneous translation, but will provide a kind of summation of at least the most important thoughts that Thelma is going to share with us. But por favor.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. Agradezco en primer lugar a los organizadores del evento por la invitación. Un gusto compartir con Andrea, Claudia y Daniel. Un abrazo cordial para ustedes y agradezco a Osvaldo por ayudarme en la interpretación.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining this panel. I want to thank everyone, especially my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be among you.
Creo que para hablar de los retos, que son muchos, que tiene el presidente Bernardo Arevalo, necesariamente tenemos que hacer 2 minutos de historia de Guatemala.
In order to speak of the current challenges that President Arévalo is facing, we need at least 2 minutes of the previous history of Guatemala.
Guatemala es un país post-conflicto que en los años 1986 vio la apertura democrática con mucha esperanza.
We need to remember that in 1986, Guatemala was a country, post-conflict country that saw the democratic opening with great hope.
Esta no funcionó. Luego surgieron los acuerdos de paz que nos daban la ruta para transitar como un país democrático, pero nunca hubo voluntad política para cumplirlos e implementarlos.
The democratic opening failed, and then we had a potential route opened by the peace accords, but these never laid out a clear path to achieve them, nor was there any political will to implement them.
Y entre sobresaltos, tristezas, angustia, esperanza, llegamos al año 2015, en el que hubo un espacio de primavera por el actuar del sistema de justicia y de la Comisión Internacional contra la Impunidad.
And so flashback to 2015, when we had somewhat of a spring of hope because of the performance of the Justice Commission.
Este pequeño espacio fue producto de la participación activa de sociedad civil guatemalteca, de prensa independiente, del apoyo de la comunidad internacional.
This small opening was thanks to the work of the civil society, independent press, and international community.
Sin embargo, vale la pena analizar especialmente qué sucedió en el año 2015, o más bien, qué sucedió después del año 2015, que Guatemala sufrió un proceso de regresión.
But then how did, after 2015, Guatemala face a regression, a democratic regression?
Y me parece que esto tiene mucho que ver con los retos del gobierno del presidente Bernardo Arevalo.
And this layout is very connected to current challenges of President Arévalo is facing now.
En el año 2015 se pensó que la justicia penal podía resolver todos los problemas de la nación, pasados y presentes.
Part of the problem is that at 2015, we thought that criminal justice could solve both present and previous problems of the country.
O tal vez más allá de lo que se pensó, resulta que no hubo apoyo del Poder Ejecutivo. Tampoco hubo apoyo del Congreso de la República.
Furthermore, there was no support of neither the executive or the legislative power.
Una justicia, un sistema de justicia sólido, no hubiese tenido o hubiese dado posibilidad a esa captura de la que hoy es víctima.
And furthermore, a solid judicial system was absent because a solid judicial system wouldn't have allowed for what we are facing now, which is a capture of institutions.
Una política criminal democrática del Estado de Guatemala planteaba 4 ejes fundamentales: la prevención, la investigación, la sanción y la reinserción de los privados de libertad.
A criminal justice would have required 4 axes. One was prevention, another was investigation, another was the reinsertion of those. Well, the third one would be punishment of those liable, and the fourth one would be to reinsert criminals into the society.
Hasta la fecha no ha habido prevención, no ha habido esfuerzo de prevención ni esfuerzo de reinserción de privados de libertad. Únicamente.
And so far, there hasn't been any attempt to build the prevention or the reinsertion axes of the system. Only punishment and in criminal investigation.
Únicamente el sistema de justicia funcionó por corto tiempo.
Furthermore, the system was very short-lived.
Y en este momento pareciera que solo el organismo ejecutivo puede funcionar adecuadamente en beneficio de los derechos y las necesidades del pueblo guatemalteco.
And the justice system, furthermore, was very short-lived, very short span. And at the moment, it seems that only the executive could provide some service for the country.
Y el Congreso de la República, que nos está dando muestras de querer apoyar este esfuerzo democrático que el pueblo necesita y demanda.
But there's also some hint that Congress would support this attempt to support the population.
De ahí que el presidente Bernardo Arevalo tiene muchos retos, pero yo quisiera resaltar la necesidad de la recuperación de la institucionalidad.
So among the many challenges that President Arévalo is facing currently, I would like to emphasize the need to recuperate the institutions.
Que pasa por recuperar al Ministerio Público como institución y al Poder Judicial.
And this necessarily involves taking back the criminal justice system and the investigation system back from corruption.
En cuanto al Ministerio Público, necesitamos fiscales honestos que garanticen la transparencia y objetividad de la investigación.
There is a dire need for independent prosecutors at the moment.
Y para el Poder Judicial, necesitamos carrera judicial para garantizar la independencia de ese alto poder del Estado.
And for the judiciary, we sorely need a civil service to guarantee that the judicial system would be independent from the power of the state.
Recuperar entonces la institucionalidad del Estado es vital para la población guatemalteca.
It is thus indispensable to recuperate institutionality for the well-being of the people of Guatemala.
La lucha contra la corrupción debe ser un objetivo prioritario.
To fight corruption must be one of the priorities.
Y esta lucha contra la corrupción no corresponde únicamente al Poder Ejecutivo.
And this is something that that the executive alone would not be able to achieve.
Porque como Estado guatemalteco somos signatarios de la Convención de Naciones Unidas contra la Corrupción que nos obliga a todos y a todas las instituciones de Guatemala.
And furthermore, we must remind that Guatemala has signed the United Nations Joint Agreement Against Corruption. There is something that is binding for Guatemala.
A la luz de esa Convención de Naciones Unidas, por supuesto que el presidente de la República tiene amplias facultades de invitar a la fiscal general a hablar sobre la lucha contra la corrupción y fortalecimiento del Ministerio Público.
This international agreement allows ample margin to President Arévalo to call upon the general prosecutor to engage in anti-corruption practices.
Además de las facultades constitucionales y leyes ordinarias del presidente de la República.
This in addition to the many powers that the president currently has.
Otro reto importante es impulsar la prevención. La prevención del delito es más importante que la sanción.
And another challenge is to make a prevention a priority. Prevention is more important than sanction.
Indudablemente, este eje de prevención, el presidente Bernardo Arevalo tendrá toda la facilidad para hacerlo, porque los fondos del Estado que antes eran saqueados por gobiernos corruptos, ahora podrán invertirse en la prevención.
And President Arévalo should have ample resources to deliver resources to prevention, because those resources that were sacked by corruption should now be divested into prevention of crime prevention.
Y la reinserción de personas privadas de libertad es parte de la prevención del delito.
And to make those people that are currently in the criminal system to get back to society, to get rehabilitated, it's an indispensable part of prevention.
Y un reto sumamente importante es incorporar a los pueblos originarios a la vida nacional, porque son los constructores de la paz social. Muchas gracias.
And furthermore, the last challenge is to incorporate the indigenous communities into the building of Guatemalan society. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Señora Aldana. And thank you all for your comments and thoughts. I thought before we turn to the questions that are accumulating in the Q&A that I might just ask whether any of you wants to comment on or ask a question of one of the other colleagues on the panel. Any? Okay. Well, one question that's come in, basically has to do with the question of the place of Guatemala in the politics of Latin America more generally. I mean, how does what's happening in Guatemala, how is it influenced by what's going on elsewhere in the region, and how is it influencing the region in turn? Does anybody have a comment on that? Claudia Méndez Arriaza.
Yes, I believe that despite what Daniel explained very well about this disruptor populist, Carlos Pineda, there's a great chance for Guatemala to show that the election that we did in not a populist, not violent disruptor, but a moderate with a vocation for democracy. It's an opportunity for the whole region to show how this vocation for democracy works for the people. I think that's a role Guatemala may play right now. Yeah, it should give a hope to the people that this is a country that didn't switch to extremes, but we chose this moderate candidate who has this conciliator fame or profile, and that's a great opportunity for us. On the other hand, I think it's the multilateral organisms that play a key role here in Guatemala during the past 6 months are another example or could become a role model for other countries. I'm talking about the role the international community, United States, the organizations of American states, OAS, and European Union. I mean, that's a precedent to have always in mind when talking about Guatemala and then the impact to the rest of the region. It's interesting to hear that Licenciada Thelma Aldana is talking about the regional or international accords that we have in anti-corruption and how those accords give the president and any authority in Guatemala, faculties that maybe at a local level might constrain, a president or a judge, but then we still have those I think I'll leave it like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other thoughts on this question? Okay, so we have a question from actually a recently retired U.S. government official who says the U.S. government has engaged in intensive diplomacy and sanctioned a wide range of individuals, including former President Giammattei, as I mentioned in my introduction, in order to facilitate President Arévalo's inauguration. What more can the U.S. government and U.S. citizens do to ensure President Arévalo's success in enacting the reforms he has committed to carrying out? Anyone? Daniel?
I don't know if you listen. Yes,
Yeah, we hear you now. Yep.
Okay. That's a really, really good question. I think that apart from the sanctions, we need to have a more precise way of enacting those actions. What I mean, for example, if you see someone like Felipe Alejos, who's been sanctioned by Magnitsky, and Sinibaldi, the same thing, Gustavo Alejos, the same thing, they still operate in the financial system, and some of them even operate contracts with the state through other people and networks of support for them. I think that the Guatemalan authorities, especially the financial authorities, and the United States authorities can work together to enact these sanctions. And I mean, and that is going to have a really profound political impact, because these people still operate against Bernardo, and there were some of them were in the, especially the Engel people list, were in the first front of attack in the recent intent of coup d'etat, and they're still big, strong enemies of reformism in Guatemala. I think that taking really seriously the risks that our financial system has of having all these sanctioned individuals operating through other people and through shell companies and things like that, can have a strong political impact. Of course, the United States can help in proposal. One thing that maybe we didn't mention before, but is really important, is that Semilla, being such a small and young party, doesn't have like these really developed and sophisticated plans of government, and that is something that you can see now in the first few days, and you certainly saw that in the transition period of power. And I think you have to try to put money but put expertise and trying to help the implementation of good policies. I think that's going to be really important. And as well, I would say the United States can help, especially with the narco problem and the narco problem in politics. They have, if you count the amount of congressmen and women related to narco trafficking organizations, I would say you have something near 30, 35 of them. That's a really strong political movement, if you want to call it that way. And I think that that can change the correlation of power if you have a stronghold of the United States regarding these figures, these political figures. And I would say as well, just international support for the Bernardo Arevalo government, and trying to be. We understand that one of the main issues that the United States has with towards Guatemala is migration policy, but having the kind of migration policy that the Trump administration was trying to implement here would be really, really bad for the Arévalo government. And I think we should have a more profound and thoughtful and humanitarian approach of migration policy towards from the United States towards Guatemala and the Arévalo government. And that's why it's so important to face the challenges that a potential Trump administration would have towards Guatemala from 2025 onwards.
Right. Great.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Another comment? Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to add also as saying and adding to what Daniel has said, like it's very important that the US citizens fight also inside their own home for their democracy and do not allow that the same type of authoritarianism that we had fought back in Guatemala these past 4 years take over the big chair, because that affects not only Guatemala, that affects the whole region. And it's very important to talk about that effects, because during the last 40 years, the continent had hosted ruinous governments and collected crises, and it has faced various forms of coup d'etat. What happened in Guatemala leaves a very bad precedent, but also is showing us new routes to face these types of action that are using the legal institutions to create this sensation of legality, when basically what is going on is a coup d'etat. And in Guatemala, the Constitutional Court continues to be part of this anti-democratic alliance that is not allowing the governance that we need, and also was part of the coup d'etat. And it's necessary that the pressure be extended towards the elections of the new magistrates and courts. So the missions of observation of all the international community is going to be very important during this process, that the experts in justice can come to Guatemala and analyze what has been the effects of the cases that the General Prosecutor Consuelo Porras has done. We need that the judiciary legists can come to actually evaluate the role of the Ministerio Público role during the past years. And also, I think something that it will be very important is the extradition of corrupt and anti-democratic actors that have been signed. That is going to be very necessary also, because we need to leave precedents, and we need to have some ways of showing that these corrupt actors needs to be responsible for their actions. So I think that can be also necessary.
Right. Thank you. So it's kind of an extension of this discussion. One attendee asks, basically, I think reflecting on the difference between today and, let's say, 1954, what is the change in, the United States position relative to the country and the region that leads it to support Bernardo Arevalo and to try to ensure that he actually took office and that sort of thing, as compared to, what has happened often in the past? I mean, how has this relationship, how has the United States relationship to the region, changed in such a way that it's supportive of the anti-corruption candidate in this election? Go ahead, Daniel.
If I may speculate, I don't know. I would be thrilled to know to be like a fly in the wall and be able to hear the different conversations that the people in the State Department had when addressing the Guatemalan the problem in 2023. But I would say that what the Guatemalan kleptocracy has to offer is not stability. It's something. It's the opposite, really. I mean, had the coup d'état succeeded, I would think it would be chaos here. They don't have legitimacy. They don't have results. They don't have a social strong base. People against in favor of the coup d'état were not nearly 9% of the population. You had an 81% against it, strongly against it. Actually, I think what what you have in the other side is not what most of the time the United States seeks, and that's political stability. Bukele does give that in El Salvador. We don't have a Bukele, as we were saying. We have just this corporate kleptocracy that I mean, pact, negotiate different corrupt exchanges, but they don't provide results for the population. And I think that's something that I would say 95%, 99% of the population in Guatemala wanted some kind of change. Maybe those 9% that were in favor of the coup d'etat didn't want this precise change with Bernardo's face, but I would say a vast majority of Guatemalans weren't in favor of Yamatei, weren't in favor of the system, and are very clear that things have to change. And I think that's what kleptocracy had to offer to the United States was nothing really good or stable.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, and adding to that, the root of for migration in Guatemala has little to do with the search of the American dream. It is above all due to the lack of healthy environment and job opportunities. And also, as Daniel says, there is no stability. Recently, in a survey conducted by Oxfam, a majority of young people between 18 and 30 years old in Guatemala, the 33% of the people they interview expressed an urgency of leaving the country. And they express and identify to leave the country because they were seeking for job opportunities, because of violence and gang crime in their neighborhood, because they don't have access to health and education, and also because of the whole political landscape and because of the types of the political class, because they don't see good leaders that can lead our country. So it is a very worrying thing when you read that the 33% of the young population of a country is thinking about leaving. And it's doing it because there are no conditions for a healthy and dignified life. So that's also part of something that the US policies also are looking back now, not as the Trump administration was framing, and that's how and why the United States needs to change in its political ways of operating.
Well, it seems to me this leads right back to the question of migration, regarding the United States interests and, not least the interests of the current administration, whose head is, in the midst of a re-election campaign that's going to turn to a very considerable extent, I think, on the question of immigration and the, control or lack thereof of the southern border. So I wonder, what you would say about what we can expect, perhaps, from the Arévalo government in regard to migration policy. I mean, obviously, some significant part of the policy that Biden is trying to implement is to keep people from coming further from places like Guatemala through Mexico and, even reaching the border. So I'm curious what you would say about what you expect in terms of migration policy from the Guatemalan side, from the Arévalo side.
Nobody wants to jump into this, but I think it's too soon to have an idea, John. What I can tell you is that the sense that I have, and I don't know if my colleagues in the panel will agree, is that this is a president with a very democratic vocation, and with democracy for vocation, we hope to see results not from day to night or from night to date, but it will take time. I still wonder what will be the approach from Arévalo to the third secure country, and it's too soon, I believe. Conditions of life, he might be able to change it. I think in infrastructure we can expect to see changes, not soon, but in the mid to long term. In education, I mean, this is a president that comes from a revolutionary in sense or in terms of education. So we will see. What I'm sure, very sure, and it has to do with some of the ideas that Daniel just shared, is that I just saw the statistics from the encounters in the border of the South of America and Mexico. And it's not a coincidence that Venezuela, that Nicaragua are way above the rest of the countries. That means political instability translates into social and economic instability, and that really hurts people's lives, as Andrea said. So we should wait for have a more clear answer to that question.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Go ahead.
wanted to
Go
add
ahead.
that obviously the improvement in access to basic services, the generation of better life and work alternatives impacts on migration, of course. However, we are facing multiple crises because now the effects of the climate crisis is impacting directly in Mesoamerican region, specifically in Guatemala, and that also is a factor that is causing forced displacement. And one of the saddest things is that Guatemala is not a polluter country. Guatemala and the Mesoamerican region are not the polluter countries that are causing the effects of the climate crisis. And that's also why it's a very necessary an urgent change in the US administration way of approaching climate emergency and the solidarity that needs to be shown by the US society, and specifically because there is a very dramatic number. If we wanted to live as a very average US citizen, we need 5 planets Earth. That means that the level of consumption of US society is over the healthy and natural Earth limits. And when do you see and contrast it on the effects that are causing the climate change that is also forcing people to displace their community and leave to find other ways of living and existing, it's very necessary that the US society checks on their own consumption ways of living. There is a necessary change on their policy addressing the climate change issues that are affecting the world, and also the necessity and urgent policies that the US needs to respect in order to support the mechanisms for loss and damage, for adaptation and mitigation to the effects of climate change that can be positively used also in the creation on the change of conditions of what's going on in our region.
Thanks for that. We're getting towards the end of our time, so I just want to say for the audience, if you have a question, please submit it now. And also my colleagues remind me that if you want to submit something in Spanish, feel free to do that and we'll just translate it for you. So don't feel reluctant to do that. But I did have a question from an audience member who wanted to ask you, Andrea, about what you hope for from in terms of treatment of the indigenous population of Guatemala. What do you hope for and what do you expect? Let's put it that way.
I think we expect a more horizontal way of looking at our own indigenous governance systems. Like our communities are beyond our folklore or the traditions. We have our own political ways of organizing, living, and existing. And also that it's something very important, it's that we need to approach more to the collective communal ways of communal politics. That's where a lot of the politicians class needs to learn from. We come from a world where you serve your community when you want to be an authority. And when the way that you serve inside your community to solve our needs is based also in the tools that you have in your hands, but also in the necessity of rotating power. And I think that's something that the actual Guatemalan political way of being organized, it's not respecting. We are not having this kind of rotating systems. We are seeing the same elites that are in all the institutions for decades. So I think the Guatemalan society is learning to see us in respect as equals. And it's also something that needs to be changed because we have a long history of colonialism and racism behind us that had led us to where we are now. And also, I think the way that a lot of people is looking at the ways that the indigenous communities have defended the land and protected what is very important that to sustain us, which is land and its water, it's very necessary to look and check on the indigenous food systems, health systems, justice systems. It's very urgent and necessary in order to create new pathways to the poly-crisis that we are facing. So I do hope and wait for respect. And I really hope and wait that the current government that is sitting in the chair right now can treat us with respect, that can do proper consultation. Because one thing that has happened a lot in the indigenous communities is this very sad saying that we have in Spanish that it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And that's something that a lot of governments have done into indigenous lands and territories by the approbation of extractive projects that are around monocultives, that are around hydroelectrical dams, and around a lot of extractive mega projects. So I hope that we can have other ways and dynamics to change those behaviors, to do nothing without the consultation and the consent of the peoples in their communities, in their lands, and that we can be part of the construction of a new path for the political organization of our country. I think that's also a goal that is necessary because we need structural changes, and they can't be done without the participation of the indigenous communities and its authorities.
Right, indeed. Thank you very much. So we're basically running out of time. I have one last question for you from Jose Artiga, who basically asks, how can the diaspora mobilize to defend democracy in Guatemala? Anybody?
Well, they have done it. They have done it. There are things that are happening here in between the diaspora and Guatemalan communities. We just covered this story about this community in the north of the country building this road that haven't been built for a decade, and it was the diaspora and the community who built it together. And it was interesting to see during the demonstrations in October that many cities in the United States have, people, Guatemalans, moving around the embassies or consulates. What's the impact or effect? Now you see them moving, demonstrating, chanting along with Guatemalans here. And I think it's only the beginning of a process. I think I've been hearing my colleagues in the panel, and I think it's very important to understand that we're talking about the change, and Arévalo right now, it's the incarnation of that change. But I've been saying this, the real change is the people of Guatemala. We change a lot and we're demanding more. And I think the indigenous and social movements are going to push forward for more changes here. That includes Guatemalans outside the country.
Right. Any final comment, Daniel?
Yeah, I would say that answering that question, I would say two things. First, I think we can have a more organized a political lobby of Guatemalans in Washington, and I think that would be really, really good. Guatemalans are becoming more and more an important part of some constituencies, and that has always had a political impact in the United States. You can see the Cuban diaspora and the political power they have. I think Guatemalans there can, in fact, organize in a more coordinated way, because now it's very dispersed. And the second thing that can have a lot of impact is that we receive here, and is the heart of the economy now, is the $20 billion that we receive from Guatemalan migrants. And this government has talked about creating a migrant bank where people not only can give the remittances to their families, but they can save some percentage of them and start having a bank that can have other alternative kinds of investments that don't favor the economic interest of the Guatemalan traditional economic elite, and it can be can bet in a more productive enterprises, and I think that could have a really big impact. If we could have an improvement of those two sides of the coin, I think that migrants in Guatemala can change the landscape of the political system in a ways we haven't visioned before.
Well, I hope they heard those words and heed your call. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to do this today. Andrea Ixchíu Hernández, Claudia Méndez Arriaza, Daniel Haering, and Thelma Aldana. I've been getting your name wrong, I think, but close enough, I hope. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Osvaldo Mena Aguilar and Juan Acevedo. They're just a sign of what fantastic graduate students we have at the Graduate Center. And I want to thank David Jacobson, who was seminal in getting this event together. He just had the pleasure of being at the inauguration and was able to talk to a lot of the people, including those here on the panel. And I don't know who else I have to thank besides Juan. He seems to have someone on his shoulder. But thank you all, and appreciate everybody's attendance and questions, and take care. Be well.
Goodbye.
Hasta luego.